Hello, beautiful souls. You are going to want to buckle up for today's episode. We dive into the world of Justine, a psychotherapist and the founder of her private practice, Carino Counseling. Justine specializes in treating anxiety disorders, depression, grief, and provides family and couples therapy also. Her advice and expertise, they've been featured in Cosmo, the Huffington Post, Real Simple, Elite Daily, and News 12. And during our conversation, the power of Justine's insights, particularly for the anxious, ambitious ones, especially those who identify with a type A personality, it was just invaluable. We chatted on topics like delegation, setting boundaries, and effective coping mechanisms for reducing anxiety through mindfulness and positive self-talk. Justine also graciously shared some of the exercises that she uses in her therapy sessions, providing us with a glimpse into her therapeutic approach. And by golly, her sense of humor was incredible. Spending time with her was truly a pleasure. So let's dive in. Hey mama, welcome to the Balanced Mom Method podcast. I know you're here because you're tired of living day after day like you're drowning in the responsibilities of motherhood. You're done struggling with trying to find the time and energy to get it all done every day. And you want to show your little ones a good example, but you're so exhausted, which has your negative self-talk on repeat, your patience spread thin, and you feel like you're losing yourself a little more every day. Plus, the mom guilt, societal comparison game, and unpredictabilities of motherhood just does not help in trying to make a change. Well, sweet friend, this podcast will guide you on how to connect with yourself to break free from that survival mode cycle, all by identifying and possibly simplifying your habits. Hey, I'm Jenna, and I've been where you are. I was consumed in the struggles of motherhood, and I needed to make a change to take back control of my time, energy, identity, and life. And in finding that freedom, it became my mission to help make that connection with moms that we can give our children and families the best and not at the expense of our own health, self, and well-being. Moms shouldn't have to choose between their families, priorities, and themselves. We can balance it all, and it all starts within ourselves. Let me take your hand and make that connection with you and equip you with simple, lifelong habits. If you are ready to say goodbye to just surviving and finally reclaim your life in motherhood, then you are in the right place. Let's get to the root of cultivating real change because it's time to feel like you again. Warm up that cold coffee, pop in your earbuds, and tighten that top knot, mama. Let's overcome together. Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Mom Method podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I have a special guest with me on the show and someone that I know that I cannot wait to dive into conversation with today about anxiety and why ambitious moms struggle possibly with irritability and burnout and just the best ways for us, yes, I'm putting myself in that category, to manage those feelings just of the stress and the anxiety and all those things. So I get to welcome Justine Carino, a psychotherapist, anxiety treatment specialist, mom of two, and she also has a private practice, Carino Counseling, based in New York. Now, someone who fits into probably every bucket of yours, being type A myself, ambitious. I feel like I function well with my anxiety because I'm actively acknowledging and working through it, as I've become more aware, especially through motherhood and working from home and staying at home with the kids. I've really had to identify those things, but I also know that I can learn so much from you. So I cannot wait to dive into conversation. Justine, I want to pass over this mic. Can you just tell us a little bit about you, your journey, what led you to become a psychotherapist, just specializing in such a deep topic?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this with you and your audience. What a great intro that you gave. How did I become a psychotherapist? I wish I had some really cool story. It's kind of boring. I took a psych class in high school and fell in love with the psych class, and I was like, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. So I was pre-med in college, and lo and behold, I hate science. I couldn't keep up with the work for pre-med.
Yeah.
I cried before every single test, and I was a pre-med quitter. But then I kept doing psych as a psych major, and then I decided to go to graduate school to become a licensed mental health counselor, which is training specifically focused on like clinical counseling skills and psychotherapy. And I think that was the best decision I made. I have my own personal stories though with mental health. As a toddler, I was selectively mute, so I wouldn't talk to anyone outside of my mom, dad, brother, and grandparents, all probably until about first grade.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom enrolled me in ballet, and for some reason that opened me up to start expressing. And when someone's selectively mute, it's usually a form of anxiety at a really young age in childhood. So I was always told I was very shy, but knowing what I know now and what I've asked my family, I'm like, oh, I was selectively mute. That's what that was. And they
Mm-hmm.
laugh like, we didn't know what that was back then. And we just thought, you were fine. But I'm also the adult child of an alcoholic. My father struggled with alcoholism his entire life. He's in recovery right now. He's doing really well. So I have my own stories of family stuff related to mental health, personal stuff related to mental health. And then I would say most recently, this is while I was a therapist. After the birth of my second child, it was during the pandemic, it was chaos. My anxiety and stress went through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started to focus a lot of my online content towards like the ambitious working moms because I felt like I could relate to it. But over time, in graduate school, I loved learning about OCD, PTSD, social anxiety, all the anxiety disorders for some reason really spoke to me. And I felt like the treatment modalities to treat those disorders made so much sense. It just clicked. And when I started seeing people do the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, to treat their anxiety disorder and seeing it work, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I am called to do. I want to help people with this. I also treat depression and depressive disorders. I see couples, I see families, but I would say anxiety disorders are kind of like the main focus of the work I do in my private practice.
Mm-hmm. I feel that there's just so much that we shove under the rug. And like when you said, when your parents might not have known or you didn't know, like being selective mute, like there's so many things. And I'm not saying that you guys shoved it under the rug. I'll get
Yeah.
to but I just feel like there's a lot of things that come in later life. And it's like those light bulb moments that you have just being a human, like having your human experience, not so much with your practice, but having that
Yeah.
human experience of just, wow, and that's where like taking those things, out from maybe your subconscious or things like that to really become aware. It's so fascinating. And psychology was my favorite class in high school and in college. And I don't know why I didn't, go further into it. Like I just enrolled in another psych class online, just to further,
Yeah.
my credentialing with, my life coaching and things like that, because it's just so, so fascinating. So can you, if you don't mind, like kind of diving more deep into a little with your story after having your second, just with the anxiety that you struggled with, just to kind of bring a more of a relatability piece to maybe that mom that's struggling in silence, how you kind of linked your anxiety with being an ambitious working mom and how you kind of worked through that.
For sure. And it's interesting. I never realized how traumatic it was to have a kid during the pandemic until I had my own therapy session. I go to therapy twice a month with my therapist. And I just broke down crying out of nowhere. I was like, oh my God, like I need to talk about that time in my life. I like shoved it down, pretended it didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But really, so I'm type A. I want to do everything all the time. I want to do everything immediately. I'm very impatient
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, relatable. And
Yeah.
what's so fascinating? I recently took a course, and the presenter said there's studies that show that type A people have more brain activity, kind of like more norepinephrine, which is
Mm-hmm.
like the energy we get in our brains. So like we can actually do more, and we often hear our spouses or our friends say like just sit down for a little, just relax. And we're like, no, I can't relax because our brain activity is just going off in a different way than like an ADHD person, which I thought was so fascinating. I was like, well, chemically we have a reason we are the
Yeah.
way we are.
I love it.
Um,
I love it.
Yes. So, after my first, I was building my private practice. I decided to leave where I was working. I was working at a family counseling agency, and my dream was to have a private practice. And after having a kid, you kind of feel like you could do anything. So I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going to take this risk. I am like a superwoman. I can create a human and birth it and go through all of that. I can do whatever the hell I want. So
Yeah.
I was so inspired. And so I started my private practice that filled up so quickly. Within 6 months, I was full and had a wait list, and it was like a dream come true. And it was easy, right? I loved every minute of it. It was just
Mhm.
natural. I woke up excited every morning because I'm so lucky to do, you probably feel this way, like blessed to do what you do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Second baby, I was not prepared for how different our lives would be. I feel like having two kids felt like having 10 kids.
Mhm.
And so I kind of expected to work the hours that I worked before, not considering that I do also have a toddler in preschool, not considering that it's a pandemic and preschool is going to close probably every week because of an exposure.
Mhm.
I would have to work at home at times. We were in the middle of a move at the time. We're all shoved in a 2-bedroom. And so trying to see clients virtually with the baby crying, with the
Right.
toddler home from COVID, and still trying to do the best I could as a therapist and show up for other people. My expectations of myself were completely unrealistic. And
Mhm.
the more I failed at it, the more anxious I got because I was like, I gotta
Mhm.
do more, I gotta do
Yeah.
more, do more. Even my maternity leave, like I couldn't take a break mentally, right, and enjoy it because my maternity leave was different than when I had my son Jackson. With Jackson, like I worked for an agency, I saved out all the vacation time, I was paid for about 4 months, I didn't have to worry. My
Mhm.
second child, this is my first maternity leave where I'm my boss, I'm my income. We don't get anything, unfortunately, as female business owners that want to take maternity leave, right?
Right.
So I was like, what's going to happen if I don't have any clients
Mhm.
waiting for me when I get back? So there's a level of pressure of like, okay, I have an income that I need to return to. So I didn't take as much time off. On my time off, I was always logging into work emails. I would log into Instagram and see what other people, like mental health people, were doing online and getting antsy, like, I got to get back to work and start doing
Mhm.
this too. So that really stressed me the hell out to the
Mhm.
point that I would wake up, my heart would be pounding. And I was like, okay, I have generalized anxiety disorder. Let me diagnose myself. I'll make an appointment to see a psychiatrist, blah, blah, blah. Lo and behold, I went to a physical. They checked my thyroid. Side note, at this time, I was also having a slew of symptoms that no one could diagnose. So I saw the cardiologist. I got a colonoscopy. I saw this person, that person. I was finally diagnosed with Hashimoto's, an autoimmune disorder,
Mhm.
which was like the cause of a lot of symptoms and some of the anxiety, but it was triggered from the level of anxiety and stress that I had at that time.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. Wow. I feel like we could all relate to the pandemic, like to some degree. Like if you were working, if you were staying home, like whatever that might be, like that was a lot. And it was
Yeah,
huge. I hope now we could kind of like look back and say like they were realizations, maybe like the shifts that we had to make and like give ourselves the grace that we have to give ourselves, right? Because it was a lot in any capacity that were in it. Um
for sure. For sure.
so with I guess like with like after your diagnosis, how did you learn like your triggers or like what the symptoms or like the signs of anxiety like moving forward, like kind of coming out of that hole, that you had to climb out of?
Yeah. So I did a lot. I mean, first of all, I got more help in my business. So
Mhm.
I have a virtual assistant that helps. I also have a podcast editor that does my podcast editing. Oh, by the way, I have a podcast, Thoughts from the Couch.
Yeah.
She helps me. I worked with a coach to help me get my business the way I wanted it to be. So I invested in a lot of support that changed so much for me, and it's been
Mhm.
amazing. I can't live without these people. Um, so that was one. In my personal life, I started going to therapy again. I'm a therapist. I believe in therapy, but I wasn't actively in therapy for a very long time, since
Mhm.
like my early 20s. So I went back to therapy, and then I got very clear on like my boundaries between work and life. And there was a lot of fear behind the changes I needed to make around that, but lo and behold, it all worked out. And I think a lot of the fear was based on irrational or limiting beliefs I had. I've always been like a workaholic. So I always thought I had to work so much to achieve or feel enough. And when I really pushed myself with that, my schedule now is completely different than it was 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. And every
Mhm.
time I tweak the boundary between work and life, I'm always scared, but it always works out for my work life and for my home life.
Mhm. So delegating, like asking
Yep.
for help, boundaries, like these things that I feel that we know, like we kind of know things that we should be doing, some things that we shouldn't be doing. I feel like I say this all the time on the show because we talk a lot about habits, right? But it's things to where you have to kind of, maybe if you are that ambitious perfectionist, you have to kind of let go a little bit, like ask for help, give away a little bit and delegate and set those boundaries. So
For sure.
that's huge. And I feel just being that type A, like that's huge because I have a lot of difficulty also asking for help at times. And it is, you brought up a little bit of like the maternity leave. I struggled a lot with that too, with being my own boss and being that
Yeah.
business owner. That sense of that push and pull, that balance of I wanted to enjoy, that maternity leave, but I was still like in the back of your mind, you have those stressors of finances, the income, like things don't run themselves. So it's it's just such a balancing act. Also,
Oh,
in a sense.
yeah. And I feel bad because I was so present with my first maternity leave.
Mhm.
With my second one, I just wasn't myself. And it was just a weird, it was 2020. Like some family members didn't even meet my daughter until she was like 8 months old because like
Yeah.
we didn't know what the heck would happen at the time. It was just chaos. It was so
Mhm.
uncomfortable in so many ways.
Mhm. Yeah, it really was. I remember with my first, like our family came to the hospital, right? Like, and then with Jalen, our second, she was born in 2022. So it was kind of like at the, coming out of it, but it was just my husband. Like, and we weren't even sure if he was going to be allowed in the hospital.
Yeah,
So just like that piece too, a total tangent, but just like those stories that you hold close in like in that core memory bank, that it was a lot. It was definitely a lot.
for sure. For sure.
So as far as like coping mechanisms, you kind of like dove into a little bit with delegation and boundaries. What are some like personal maybe habits, or if that ambitious mom is struggling with that stress anxiety, what are some things that she could do for herself?
Yeah, I love this question. And I have 1,000 things she could do, but
I love it. Go.
I'm gonna try and limit it to my top few. I actually I put together a course. It's called The Path to Peace, which focuses on stress and anxiety management for ambitious moms. And the way I kind of view that course, and I'll share a little bit of what's in there, is
Mhm.
it's preventative. Like I'm trying to prevent you from having a mental health crisis because the type A highly functioning, ambitious woman is so vulnerable to develop an anxiety disorder, whether it be generalized anxiety, OCD, whatever you name it. You are at risk just by the way you function naturally. So in my private practice, I like to view it as like I am now intervening when the shits hit the fan. Like the person is full blown disorder or they're heading there and they're like need these tools and I'm intervening. I'm getting in there.
Mhm.
With my online presence in my podcast and my course and I'm putting together some group programming, it's more of like you're not there, right? You're not in crisis, but you're teetering the line. Like if you push
Mhm.
yourself a little more, you're going to be over the edge. So some of what I will share with you are skills and strategies I teach people in my private practice one to
Mhm.
one. And over time, I kept teaching the same like core pillars to stress and anxiety management and seeing such great results. I'm like, okay, more people need to see this outside of my psychotherapy doors. I'm only
Mhm.
licensed in New York. So I was like, how can people have more access? So we'll go into those skills now.
Yeah.
Um, the first skill, and like I said, I'm going to try and narrow it down to a few, is learning about mindfulness and really starting to practice it. Because if you are a busy brain, an overthinker, doer, you are not very present. You're really always thinking about the next thing you have to do.
Mhm.
And that can create a lot of anxiety for people. We often say in psychology, like if you're ruminating on the past, you're probably depressed, right? You're feeling some depression. And if you're feeling so worried about the future and thinking about the future and there's uncertainty, you're probably dealing with anxiety.
Mhm.
So with mindfulness, it's the concept of training yourself to become present with all of your thoughts, feelings, behaviors, noticing how those things feel in your body and focusing on it without judging yourself for it. So Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, he really brought mindfulness concepts to the US, and a lot of research has been done on how mindfulness can improve mental health, especially with anxiety and depression. And it's something that needs to be built over time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people associate mindfulness with meditation. Meditation is one way to practice mindfulness, but mindfulness is really a concept. It's the state of being present and aware of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I like to teach people this in my practice by giving the example of what mindlessness is. Like, have you ever walked in a room and you're like, how the hell, why am I in here? What am I doing in this room? That's mindless, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're in your head, but you habitually walked in somewhere. Or have you ever habitually drove somewhere and you're like, why am I here? Why did I drive here?
And then you're like, oh my gosh, how did I get here? I drove here.
Yes, I've done that. That's mindlessness. As busy moms, we're all over the place. Like my day today, I was like, had to fill out like the registration forms to enroll my son in CCD in the fall. I had to drop off my daughter. I had to get to the bus stop for my son. Like 1,000 things already happened before I sat at my desk.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, I got to order my contacts. I'm going to run out of contacts. Like thousands of things. So I'm not really present. I'm always worrying. So when women, mothers, anybody out there, but for this audience, mothers can learn how to be really present and focus on like what is right in front of you in that moment, one thing at a time. Your nervous system is automatically going to calm itself a little bit. And now you're going to be able to react to situations from your set of values, from a sense of calm. You're not going to be as reactive with screaming, yelling, stress. And I'll tell you a little bit about the neuroscience behind this. Studies have shown if we practice mindfulness as little as 5 minutes a day, 3 days a week, and I'll give examples how we could do that, the communication between our prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that helps us plan, and our limbic system, which is the emotional area, that wiring gets strengthened. So what that means for us is we become less emotionally reactive to triggers. So there's a stronger connection between this planning area, and it talks to our emotions and it's like, okay, you don't have to freak out right now. Like we can problem solve first, right? But if we don't practice mindfulness, we freak out right now. Our brain is like, what do I do?
Yeah.
But when we practice this mindfulness, it really creates a connection where we can become less reactive. And as moms, when we're reactive, we tend to then have guilt and shame. Why did I yell? Why did I scream? Why did I panic? I'm horrible. Put ourselves down. That adds to depression and anxiety. I'm talking a lot, and
no, keep going, because it's so true that cycle. And we talk about that. I call it our mindset loop. So it's more so like that negative mindset loop that brings in those feelings of anxiety, the overstimulation, the burnout, and then transitioning to that positive mindset loop with your thoughts and beliefs. So keep going. Go.
Okay.
So
go.
So
people are probably like, I want to practice mindfulness. How do I start? Right. So it's paying attention in the moment to your thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? Being curious. So I'll give an example. This year, my son started kindergarten, and it was the first time I had to be out the door by a certain time. And or that bus is leaving, right? I used to be drop off. I can leisurely bring him to preschool.
That's where we're at now. So that's us in the fall. So I'm
different ball game.
Yeah.
The panic of this bus leaves, whether or not you're at the bus stop, is like next level. So I had a hard time adjusting to that concept. That freaked me out, because a trigger for me is I don't like to be late, right? So if my son was taking too long to eat his breakfast, or dilly-dallying with the shoes while I'm trying to get my 2-year-old dressed, I would scream and yell. And I am a trained therapist, and I was not doing anything therapeutic in my home for a long time, because my fight or flight kicked on. It was, oh my God, we're going to miss this bus. And then the projection to the future. Then I'm going to be late to work. Then I'm going to have to tell a client I'm not there. Blah, 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 blah. My whole day will be off because Jackson didn't put his shoes on time when I asked him to.
Yeah.
And then once I got familiar, in these moments when he's slow, my heart is pounding. and I feel really tense and I'm starting to sweat. And when I feel that anxiety, I get angry. And maybe there's a different way I can react to this, or
Mhm.
maybe I can problem solve, right? What can I do to fix this reaction? And
Mhm.
that also does some inner work too. Like, why am I so reactive to being late? Like, where does that come from for myself?
Right.
Like, that is why am I putting that on my kids? So long story short, we problem solved. We figured it out. We're now early at the bus stop, but I had to be mindful. I had to be present. What am I thinking about when I'm not getting out of the door on time or 15 minutes before? Why am I panicking? Why is my heart pounding? How am I feeling? So that was recognizing what I needed to do. So I corrected that with a lot of affirmation. If he's running behind schedule, I'm running behind schedule. I say to myself, like, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. Everything's fine. If he misses the bus, I drop him off. Like, I had to really change my self-talk, which I'll get to. That's point number two.
Mhm.
But so being mindful is, you practice being in the moment. You could also practice meditation, whether it's a guided meditation on the apps or you just sit in silence by yourself for 2 minutes a day. That's another way to practice it. When you're starting to feel very triggered and anxious, I like to recommend something called a rainbow room, where you go through all the colors of the rainbow in the room you're in, and that gets you out
Mhm.
of your head and into the moment. So wherever you're sitting and you're panicking, okay, everything in the room that's red, everything that's orange, yellow, blue, green, okay? And you might have to do that 3 or 4 times, but you will notice your nervous system start to
Mhm.
calm. Deep breathing. It's so basic and so underrated, but
Mhm.
when we take control of how we're breathing, we're now triggering the other part of our nervous system that puts off the relaxation response. So then our body's like, oh, we're breathing slowly. I can de-escalate that fight or flight. I can turn it off and I will turn on my calming system now.
Mhm.
And naturally, a good 15 minutes later, we can be calm. So paying attention to your breathing and slowing it down. Um, Also, there's a technique called name it to tame it. Very simple. You have an overwhelming feeling, name that feeling, get specific. Is
Mhm.
it anxiety or is it fear? There's a difference.
Mhm.
Is it irritability? Is it cranky? Are you tired? Are you happy? Are you excited? Get very clear with what that emotion is, how it feels in your body, what thoughts are related to it. And once you do that, you start to then process that emotion and it moves through you a
Mhm.
lot faster. So, name it to tame it is another one. So, mindfulness and getting familiar with it as a practice, it's going to take time. You don't get abs overnight. You get, well, I've never had abs, but maybe someone found a way to get abs in 6 months, not me. But they practiced, they worked at it. They didn't
Mhm.
they didn't do sit-ups for one day. So that would be
Right.
my first one. Mindfulness.
I and we talked like that is the bulk of this show, and I love how you brought in like the science, and because I just enrolled in another course too, neuroplasticity, and it's just like rewiring your brain in a sense too to acknowledge like you said that a couple times, like the recognize it, right? It's
Yes.
okay because I feel like we shove it under the rug because that guilt or like those negative feelings, right? Because we have the guilt, we have the resentment, we have that fear, the whatever it might be. So we're just like, shove it under the rug, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep
Yes.
going. So
Yes.
that acknowledgement piece is it's crucial. It's step one, right? It's number one.
One. It's step one.
Mhm.
Totally.
So what was your number two?
Number
So
two, yes. So my second big tip is challenging your self-talk. So, and this is derived from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the best treatment for anxiety. And it's a process of really starting to pay attention how you talk to yourself all day, right? I think they say there's over 6,000 thoughts a day, and about 70% of those thoughts are negative.
mhm,
Now, we were wired for it to be negative because when we were cave people, we had to think negatively in order to survive. We had to think, oh, if I go approach that bear with the cubs by the river, it might eat me. That saved us. If we
right.
didn't think negatively, we would be dead.
Nick
So this
Cruz,
was
like who hasn't seen that movie? Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So we are wired to think negative, which only means about 30% of our thoughts are neutral, if that, maybe even positive. So we have to do a little bit of work to challenge how we're thinking about
Mhm.
things. A lot of our thoughts are based on assumptions. a lot of thoughts are based on past traumas that we're bringing into the present. That's how home therapy is so helpful. We can correlate the present with the past and then be like, wait a minute, you're projecting something that happened 10 years ago now. That's not your life now. Let's let go of that. We develop these beliefs, these limiting beliefs about ourselves, and those beliefs influence the way we think all day. For a lot of like type A, ambitious women that want to do it all, they live in the should world. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I shouldn't, or I ought to, or I must, right? So we love, this is our corny therapy joke. Don't should all over yourself, right?
I love it.
We should all day long. And that leads to a lot of perfectionism. And that perfectionism leads to all or nothing thinking, right? If I don't lose all my baby weight, then I'm fat. If I don't look this way this summer, then I'm this, right? If I don't make this much money, then I'm that. We forget there's gray areas in life that we need to consider. And we actually feel better when we live in those gray areas, away from the perfectionism, the all or nothing thinking, and the shoulds, right? And so much of our shoulds are like made up. Like they're rules we literally create for ourselves, right?
Those expectations, yep.
Yes. And motherhood, that comes up. A good mom should be blank. A good mom should be blah, blah, blah. Or a good employee should be doing this. Or a good mom that owns a business should be doing that. All day long, the shoulds rule our life. So the best way, along with the mindfulness, to manage stress and anxiety is get to know your shoulds and challenge them. And one way I like to challenge them is ask yourself, like pluck out the thought. Okay, I said to myself, I should blank. Say, is this thought helpful? And is it even true? Most of the time, it's neither. It's probably very unhelpful to think about and hold on to. So let's detach it. And it's most likely not even true. It's probably an assumption you've made or a rule you created from somewhere. And now that's setting up unrealistic expectations for yourself that you need to let go of. So once you say, okay, not helpful, not true, I decide to let go of this thought today. And it's not that easy. You might have to remind yourself all day long, I'm not thinking about that today. I'm letting that go. You affirm yourself. But that, I would say, is so helpful for women trying to manage anxiety and stress.
I feel like I could talk to you all day. All day. It's so fascinating. And I feel like you said this too, like it's kind of simple concepts. Like the solutions are simple, but we're so habitually in whatever season of life we're in. We're habitually in like that thick of the negative thought spirals or whatever that might be, to where we might not feel like we're capable, of that solution, but it really is simple, like the breath work, the mindfulness. So it's key. I love it. So where can people find you? Give us some information about your private practice. You're based out of New York, your podcast, your courses, your resources.
Yeah. So my website is carinocounseling.com. On there, you will see information about my private practice. I also do anxiety coaching for anyone outside of New York State that wants to work with me. I'm not licensed to do psychotherapy out of state, but I can coach. So I do some anxiety coaching. My podcast is Thoughts from the Couch. And I have my online course, The Path to Peace, for stress management for ambitious moms. That's also found on carinocounseling.com. And on Instagram, my handle is Thoughts from the Couch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much just for being with us today. And I will be listening back to this on repeat, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners today will be too. And everything that we discussed, I'll just link everything in the show notes below, guys. So thank you so much again, Justine, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I love this.
Yes. And until next week, mamas, as always, simply be you. You have everything inside of you to reach your breakthrough. I'm sending my love and light.
Did you find this episode valuable or for farming? Please leave Mama a review.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me on the Balanced Mom Method podcast. I pray this episode has grown and helped you in some way. If it has, I'd be so grateful if you left a review sharing how it's impacted you. It truly lights me up hearing you're on your way to your breakthrough. And then, please share this episode with another mom who may be struggling to remind her we are never alone. And remember, there isn't ever a one-size-fits-all to overcoming our personal hardships. but there are a lot of parallels with how we show up to our lives and common habits we can make our own to live an intentional life full of peace, presence, confidence, clarity, and balance. Be sure to check the show notes for additional ways to connect with me, our mom community, and resources and courses for you to overcome your survival mode cycle once and for all with doable habits. Thank you. I appreciate all you are and all you do. Sending my love and light.